All right, everybody. So I was requested by a person in this forum of the Kill Pete strategy to comment on this thread, and I feel the best way is to like do a video because it's like a discussion, and I know it's a one-person discussion, but if you were here, we could talk. And yeah, and also I just extracted the main ideas that everybody talked about, and I made some slides. So I don't know if that is nerdy of me or whatever, but I didn't put a lot of effort, just the bare bones, just because it's easier to kind of just get through it without monotonously reading it. But you can read the form right here, and I hope that everybody that commented, you're cool with discussing this, and I'll do my best to strongman all of your arguments in any way that I can, but at the same time, give a balanced perspective. Um, that's the intention. Whether I do that, it's up to you to decide. So, yeah, okay, so getting better at philosophy. So basically, what do we mean when we say that, right? Getting better at is obviously a skilled or a learned based thing. So this question, I would actually say, is psychological in some ways. What are the things that you're doing with your mind or your behavior, uh, or how you're living your life? That could be a bit more philosophical. It depends on what you mean by that, right? So, Real Human Being here says he's looking for what helps people get at what help people get better at philosophy. He wants to get better at doing philosophy. So the other thing fundamentally too is what do I mean by philosophy, right? So, and philosophy, like I didn't put any references here, so don't expect it. Hold on a second, we have a problem. Okay, there we go. Philosophy is defined as the love of wisdom, right? Philosophia. And so that just kind of leads us to the question, like, what is wisdom? And so you could define wisdom as like the soundness of your reasoning, like the capacity to make sense of things and ideas, your ability to critically analyze evidence and claims, like reasoning, and the soundness of your judgments, actions, decisions. Excuse me. Fundamentally, like I think the good life would be tied with wisdom. It would those connect somehow, right? And being effective is also in there, and the how of living your life. So, I think wisdom is important to understand, and I think we need to be clear about what we mean, right? Because philosophy is a multifaceted phenomena or entity or subject, whatever you want to say, because there's you doing it. There's like you being philosophical in yourself. There's how you interact with others, and there's different modes of being philosophical, right? Like if it's self-reflect, I think that's part of it. Is and then the next point I say is there's these achievable skills, like skills that you can build over time. They're not fake, like mind reading, like trying to like be a psychic and like is that a skill? I don't know if it's a real skill because you might see some data, but it's not going to be better than chance. Your capacity to like know things. I think we can read people through mirror neurons and empathy, obviously, right? But you can't just start reading off numbers and shit. So, anyways, the point is these achievable skills. There's certain things that you're doing, like the capacity of judgment, how you make decisions, how we read texts, and the problem with academic philosophy fundamentally is it only focuses on reading, writing, your listening skills, your comprehension skills, following certain formats, rote memory, right? There's a little bit of discussion, but the bigger the university, a lot of the times the classes are larger and the professor just doesn't have time to go into things in depth, right? So, philosophy can't be limited to the current state of the university. It is a thing that multiple people are participating in at the same time. And so part of it is participating with others, but there's also almost like a religious spiritual thing, like your connection with God is something that you have. I don't necessarily believe in God. I don't believe in God in the same way that religious people do. Like, it scares me kind of. It's a scary idea, you know. So Yeah. So when we look at these achievable skills, it's important to understand the nature of how you're interacting with stuff. And this thing takes self-awareness and training. And so part of this is the notion of critical thinking, right? And so critical thinking is the evaluation of beliefs, evidence, claims, statements, text. You can apply a critical approach towards like our own behavior, and we can modify it, as we see in like performance training, or if you make mistakes, or if you have bad habits, or really fundamentally, that's kind of what it means to be mentally well and have mental health, right? So I think that mental health is also tied into the nature of wisdom as well. Like somebody that, you know, is suffering and they hate life, we wouldn't say that's an example of wisdom, nor would we say it's a good life. And they would probably give the self-report that it's not. People that suffer from mania, like, you know, it's hard for them to not want to be manic because it feels good. It's like euphoric. So, you know, it's not always how we feel about things, and that's where we would apply principles. And where we drive those principles is a different discussion. Some of this is just from the human condition, like we need to sleep, for example. And if you can't sleep, you have to address that, right? Or your diet, exercise, all that kind of stuff. So philosophical problems, what does this mean? Or when you approach something that doesn't make sense, either analytically or scientifically, right? You see some phenomena in nature and it defies what you believed. Or you have some understanding and now it doesn't make sense anymore. Like the equation doesn't work. It starts to break down. And so we could say that's actually like what's really going on is there's a philosophical problem. There's a problem of how we're conceptual. Like, this is what this usually means, especially academically, how we conceptualize things, how we're thinking about it. Usually when someone has a problem in life, you wouldn't say that that's a philosophical problem, because philosophy is generally like been limited to inquiry alone. It is a thinking activity, and it can be done from the contemplation stage. But, you know, that's more like semantic knowledge, and semantics is important. However, we need to be able to look at the procedural wisdom. It depends on what we mean by wisdom, right? And so I think it's important just to learn all of it, right? Don't just say it's one or the other. It's just, you know, you got to do all of these things. And what does wisdom mean to you at the end of the day? So if we take the academic understanding of conceptual problems, like you could say, I don't know if this is philosophical, but we'll frame it philosophically. It's more of a religious issue, but like the whole free will, the existence of ego, God is all good in the existence of evil, and then free will and God's foreknowledge. So those are two like conceptual issues that religious people have to deal with, and they'll usually turn to philosophy to try to figure it out, right? I think that's the example of the rabbit hole. So you start, it's a long journey, right? And so yeah, Real Human Being says, so this is a summary of this statement. It was 1217. I just put the first name of the initials of the person and their time to just go through them. There's 15 slides, so it's not that many. Okay, so yeah, so what's worked for you? So an example from their own experience. They look at philosophical problems and try to give their own solutions to each problem before looking up how other people would answering the problem. So I think the first step before trying to like give solutions to things is definitely understanding what it is, you know? And when you broaden your perspective, you can approach it from different angles and see how it makes sense and stuff. But I think that like there's two ways that we can do this. One is conceptually, and the other is like empirically or rationally in empiricism. Rationalism is empiricism. So the main thing with, you know, this is like the epistemology of the early modern period. It's just how do we know things? And so, just reading what you wrote here. When we think of a philosophical problem, usually the meaning is conceptual. It's not like someone's life issue. And that goes back to what philosophy means and the journey of philosophy, or like sometimes people will talk about enlightenment, you know? And I believed in that too. And I do kind of have a sense of it. And it's not a static thing. It's dynamic. Like it's like surfing at the edge of a waterfall that's moving forward, like Silver Surfer. Things are always uncovering and changing in your experience. And fundamentally, you have to have an understanding of what has been, and then prepare yourself for what is like going on right now and what will go on in the future. humans evolved certain capacities to predict the future and to think about things. And, being philosophical is just part of it is how you live your life, and then how you balance all the parts of your mind, including your reasoning. So it's just that one of them you would say is a practical philosophy, and fundamentally psychology has kind of just taken the reins of that and labeled it a different thing, the science of the soul, or the psyche, psychology. And so, but really it's the study of being, just from a specific perspective. And so, yeah. Okay. So what has helped you think critically? So this is a different question, right? Critical thinking is, learning logical fallacies, for example. Like, that's formal and informal. That's really useful. And when information is being presented to you, and then when you're thinking about things, if you come to some conclusion, you can kind of do like a screening check. Is it satisfying, does it violate ad populum? Just because the majority believes something is true doesn't actually mean it's true, right? So, and there's a whole bunch of ones. There's formal ones, like modus ponens and modus tollens. They're like hypothetical syllogisms and stuff. So you just want to make sure that you have to spend some time learning these things, and then every time you learn, it's like a new cognitive skill. It's a skill of reasoning that you can apply to things. So critical thinking, take a class. Like, the classes will be very challenging, and being challenged to that level will really help. You know what I mean? I think it really comes down to how much you value practicing these skills, because I went to university for a very long time, studying philosophy. I have 2 degrees in philosophy. And so, I haven't read all the books, but I've read a little bit, and I don't know. It's a commitment, and it depends on what is meaningful to you. If you suffer from reading philosophy, then you shouldn't be reading it, Or maybe you need to get other things in your life in order first, so you can sit down and read what somebody else wrote. But it's like, there has to be like a core starting position of philosophy. It can't just be like an infinite regress that this person references this person up until when, like on forever. Philosophy had to be derived from someone's experience initially at some point. Either the experience of thinking about something or the experience of doing something and describing that, and there's some wisdom in what they understood on either plane of knowledge there, rationally or empirically. So, you just got to be able to do it for both things. And I think that part of the problem of philosophy is it's kind of lost this way of being element to it, And so thinking critically, like, get a textbook and go through it. I think it's better just to take a class and just at least go to the class. Be willing to do shitty and then just do it again. You know what I mean? People complain about money, but like, what else do we spend money on? We waste money on fucking stuff all the time. So learning to think about life and get a sense of ourselves is more important than anything, and it's better to do it earlier, because then it's like you avoided a whole bunch of mistakes that you didn't have to make. And I think that's part of what wisdom is. You would say, oh, I fucked up. What happened? Oh, I did this. Be like, oh, that was unwise of you. Right? Well, why? Oh, because if you were aware of this thing, or if you paid attention to that, you wouldn't have done this thing. Or I take on too much sometimes, and then I fucking get myself into trouble. So I have to not do that. So that being wise is like, reflecting, being aware of our mistakes and not doing them. And that applies to our reasoning as well. Okay, so I hope you're blah, blah, blah. So yeah, okay, so next slide. So understanding. So basically, so Lotz here is talking about these different things that they use to get good at philosophy. One of them is the concept of understanding, that when we try to understand ourselves, others, ideas in general, that value of understanding will lead us to the path of being philosophical, at least in the way that we think. And, like the doing part, I think is a step that we have to add something to. Just understanding won't cover that, because people can have a desire to know. Like, what does understanding really mean? Does it mean like going out and testing nature, or is it just a thinking thing, So anyways, empathy, perspective taking. And then when we talk about empathy, there's one is the intellectual side and the other is the emotional side. Like, how would somebody feel if X occurred, or if we act in a certain way, or how would I feel, is more of a self-awareness thing. And then the perspective taking is like, how do they see it? independent of emotion, and that could be their reasoning, right? So having an open mind and not being dogmatic, super important skills. And dogmatism, we find that when the conversation stops for a religious person, the religious person is, unable to take the perspective with the reasoning process because it violates it. I mean, not all religious people, but I find that often, or it's hard for religious people to go there because it's gone past the point of no return in the way that they think about things. And that's the nature of dogmatism. It's you stop asking questions, right? And you demand that of others as well. It's unphilosophical. So an open mind is important, but as some of the critical thinkers, like I think Shermer, or I don't know, maybe it was one of those guys, he's like, have an open mind, but not so much that your mind falls out, your brain falls out. And self-reflection, super important, being aware of yourself and thinking about what happened in the past. This goes back to Plato and Socrates. An unreflected life is not worth living. That's in the Apology, the dialogue. And so that is definitely very important. It goes back to the very roots of Western philosophy, right? I think it would be in other areas too. I just can't pull it up. It's a Chatty G question. So seeing in third person, so that's like an objective analysis of yourself, right? And then just awareness in general of your mindfulness is important. And mindfulness is important for being good at being philosophical, because if it's a skill, then you kind of have to, if you can be aware of your trajectory and what is improving and what is not, you'll be more successful at that, right? And understanding how the world works to some degree because you live in the world. So then the notion of core beliefs and being able to take, there's certain perspectives, there's certain strategies we have in how to take a perspective. This is from Lotz here. And when we have these different strategies on how to look at things, we can apply that to our core beliefs and beliefs in general. Then there's also how we view problems and situations. And so this is like a metacognitive thing. It's a high level of awareness. And it's super, practicing that level of awareness is very good for us. And through meditation and reflection and journaling, feedback from others, getting the information from that source, you can get better at it, right? You want your brain to encode words with specific things in the world and in you. And you want that relationship to be accurate, to be true. It's a correspondence theory, right? So then he gives some examples of different perspectives. There's a perspective on our value for life. There's a perspective on the fate or free will kind of distinction. Religion in general is like a perspective. And so being able to analyze those perspectives would be engaging in being philosophical. And then I guess the development of different strategies, right, would also help, right? And that's part of what we get when we read the history of philosophy. It is a practice. And in some ways, I would say our duty, if we are the young philosophers, whatever age you are, but you're starting out, it is your duty to read a chunk of it for you to see how we got to where we are and the way we think about things. And then maybe you can take a step forward, because eventually, high probability, we're all going to die here, so maybe technology will break through, but who knows? And you at least got to stay healthy now and for the foreseeable future. And within that time, if you can, at least for yourself, understand it, because you want to know where you are. I want to know where I am. And I read philosophy to see where in this cosmos of humans I am placed, And so perspective strategies are important, and it's like critical thinking, right? Okay. So the next one, so that keeps on going. And then Nukes talks about actively working on things. I guess this is up here. Yeah, actively working on things. So that's, again, like the psychological focus training. So if you had a goal of being a great boxer or something like that, you would focus your form and your speed would get better. You would do auxiliary exercises like skip rope or whatever. And so what are the things that you would work on then, right? And that's why taking a class is easy, because you kind of offload the what to do on someone that is a professional, which is good. Learning from people is useful, you don't have to necessarily get degrees or like, I almost have like an addiction to knowledge. It's compromised a lot of other things in my life because it's hard to work when you're fucking in school, right? So by my age, people get a lot of money. I have a lot of understanding that I have to learn how to turn into income, but you always give something up. You can make the choice to learn to the degree that's healthy for you and your lifestyle, right? So following thoughts, so being aware of our thinking, and that's part of self-awareness and reflection. And then even if in the moment it's hard because you're upset or you're emotional, just be aware of the thinking process and then compare it to valid or sound forms of reasoning that you will develop patterns for. And so it gets easier to kind of see it. And when you're faced with new situations or if you're under a lot of pressure, sometimes things just happen. It's challenging for you in that moment. And that's part of the wisdom, is to not willingly jump into those things to make your life harder. And then the other thing is that you reflect on it and then you think of how I could have done better. How can this reasoning improve? And when you see how all the mistakes are, you can at least, again, like I said earlier, screen those out. Okay, so following thoughts. And then, so that's following the reasoning to premise to conclusion. So that's the thing. Interacting with others. So we want to take our... Sorry, I was checking something here. There you go. One second, I have to just get this thing working. So we take our... that same relationship we have with ourselves to other people. And it's just that it's you have to be, you can, sometimes people will say things to themselves, but if you said it to another person, it would be offensive. So you have to be mindful of them. Like with empathy comes like compassion and care and regard for them, not like actively causing suffering. Like if it's hard for someone to have a discussion about religion, I'll stop. I'll be like, I don't have to fucking talk about it anymore. Or like, if it's an inappropriate context, like a funeral, like that's not the place to do it. And then reading. And reading is super important. A lot of people would say to truly be philosophical, again, is to go through the books and just read them. Don't like, and you're going to have to read them more than once until you get really good, you know what I mean? Or how slow you can go through it, how much time do you have. And writing in itself is very useful because it compresses the information in a way that you understand. And so, yeah. Reading is super important, and you can just like look at like Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, or even just like Wikipedia is going to be relatively accurate, and look at the history of philosophical works and just, start somewhere. Plato usually is where people will start. There's the pre-Socratics. Aristotle's awesome. You know what I mean? Seneca's got some things to say. There's the Stoics, like Marcus Aurelius and Epictetus and Epicurus. And then you get like medieval stuff, which is where a lot of the religious Christianity stuff came from, and like Boethius and St. Augustine and Aquinas. It depends on your interest, right, of what you want to learn, quote unquote, philosophically. And that's why taking an introductory course at the university is useful, because they just go through the major figures. It's changing a little bit because our culture is kind of changing, but they'll go through the main ones for sure. So reading is important. And then there's a way to read. It's applying our critical thinking to these concepts and ideas, and you take one statement at a time and you ask yourself, is this true? How does this connect to the other statements, which is looking for validity? And the truth of it sometimes requires research. You have to see if it's based in evidence and these kinds of things, right? So that's what education is. It's going through the process of looking that stuff up, and then you got to commit it to memory, and then you have to be able to coherently explain whatever it is. Okay, so next one. So Lotz talks about what influences how we see things or approach ideas. So part of that is like bias. Like, what is your interest? Like if you're super hungry and you're like, do I go left or right? Being hungry will determine your decision in some ways. If someone has a religious orientation, then those values and the scripture itself and the community will fundamentally influence how they see the world, and how, like pro-life, pro-choice, or how they approach ideas. Does it fit within their Christian ideology, for example, right? And so being a philosopher, to some degrees, you would really have to develop your relationship with religious ideas in a way that you can make sense of it, which is challenging, because that's why faith exists, right? I was talking about this earlier with my philosophy group. So then Lotz gives out some topics: the love and human connection, extraterrestrial life, objective reality. Do people change? And so how do we approach these topics like there, lots would be arguing that there is an approach to topics like this that we would say is philosophical, meaning that some approaches are they would have to they not be philosophical, right? Or at least have some kind of a spectrum. Then they talk about our beliefs on certain topics influences our outlook, which basically is a repetition of that. So there's like meta beliefs that, or higher ordered beliefs, like this value can never be broken. And so if something contradicts that, then I just let it go, right? Like God exists. That is fundamental. And if somebody says, well, how can God know everything and you still be able to like make a free choice? If God knows what you're going to do, you're not really free to do it. So they would say, well, we're just human. We don't understand stuff. Like I'll never question whether God exists. It's just that, I'm a petty human and I can't understand God's plan. So that's like a poor response, right? Anyways, the mind of questioning beliefs tied to our perspective. So the way we're looking at things, in some ways, there's lots of, I'm expanding on what lots is saying here, but also kind of summarizing it. The way that we look at things, right, is tied to the structure of our mind in itself. And that's something that, like even mental illness can be explained this way, right? If someone has like obsessive compulsive disorder, they're having repetitive thoughts and then repetitive behaviors. And so fundamentally, that is part of their mind, and they may have beliefs based on those behaviors and those thoughts. And so the belief itself is coming from somewhere, right? This is an example of how it's bad. So good things are good as well. Like if you're like, I'm going to get a job and work honest money and contribute to society, pay my taxes, take whatever fair pension they give me and have a good life, right? Those are all beliefs that are coming from some kind of a mental framework. And so understanding that framework of the mind, lots would be discussing how that's beneficial to becoming more philosophical. And I would agree, right? Most of these things they're fundamentally 100% agree with. Then this is something that I would ask to lots. I would say, they say like believe something opposite to what you think. And I think that perspective taking is different. Empathy is different than belief, like that you ascribe to a belief, like this is my belief, I can understand somebody's perspectives and I can completely disagree with them. I don't have to believe in it, right? I think that that's an important distinction to make. Sorry, one second. Talking a lot. I've been talking for like 30 minutes almost. Okay. When we're using our critical thinking, I can apply critical thinking like I just did to the free will omniscience problem for Christians or whatever. And I don't have to believe in God or any of that stuff to understand the nature of the reasoning and the ideas. I will not ever have the same experience as another person. I can understand what their experience is like. They can describe it to me, but I'm not going to like manifest that in myself. That's not, unless we had some, thing between our brains, maybe there's a thing there, but you know what I mean? Like that just doesn't happen. That's not part of their human nature. Empathy is different than that. So we can understand what it is, like how a doctor understands something but doesn't have the illness themselves. We can understand the beliefs of others, or I can be happy for my friends if they're getting married. I'm like, oh, this is great, and I understand it, even though I'm not experiencing it. So, and you also don't have to believe it. Understanding goes. That's why understanding is so powerful, and why it's like a meta value. And being philosophical, we could say that the nature of understanding or the value of understanding as a goal is almost tied to being. How could you be a philosopher if you didn't value understanding? Doesn't make sense, right? So it seems like it's one of the necessary properties of being philosophical. Excuse me. And then insight into other views about the world. So how do other people see things? Excuse me. And understanding that. And part of it, I think, would be incorporating things that I didn't know. And I'm like, that is correct. I that is a good thing. And now I also agree with you. I believe in that too. Or I didn't see how things were like that. And sometimes in the moment it might be hard. And you can take breaks from discussions. Like, when I was younger, it was like, there was this whole, like, maybe alpha dominance or something stupid when you're young. And you just have to, like, be correct or be right or have some weird thing, socially. But
if you can just do it in increments that is healthy for you and the other person, where you're listening to each other, you're not raising your voices, you're not being malicious, like people can get angry at each other and try to hurt each other in what they say and how they communicate with one another. Not cutting people off. I find that sometimes there's this thing where like I think people have like bipolar disorder and they're manic and they just talk really, really fucking fast and they've learned philosophy, so they're not delusional, but you do disagree with some of the things that they say and you don't even have enough time. Like your short-term memory is just like it's not enough time, but like they've already thought about all of it and they're just kind of like on fast forward, like on YouTube, like 2 times, and it's like we need to just take it one step at a time. Unless I'm going to like record you and take notes and come back the next day, you know what I mean? So I think that the way we engage with others to understand each other is inherently part of being wise, because then you're not ignorant, and being ignorant is not wise, right? If you don't understand the other person when you're talking about something, you're kind of ignorant in some ways, and so that's not a good thing. Okay, so and then they said this is word salad. It's like, no, it's not. You did a great job explaining stuff, and I think that I know I learned something too. It was great. Okay, so next person, this guy. So there's always a bias in perspective taking of others. So whenever we're trying to have empathy of other people, we're biased in some ways, right? Because we really don't know. And this is basically guys talking about projection. We're ascribing our own way of seeing things, or how we're reading into them, into what that person is experiencing. But they may not be experiencing it, right? And then, in psychology or cognitive behavioral therapy, they can talk about the mind reading distortion. You are, again, claiming to know the intentions of others or what they're thinking without testing it and figuring it out. Our imagination of what others think is often flawed, is what Lott says. And sometimes I think that we can have a good sense of things. Like you can read people well with your nonverbal behavior, and it is a practice, so I think it's important to find a way to socialize where people are welcoming and comfortable, and that we're bonding as a group together, and then that can happen in different formats. Like I'm taking this class on the psychology of music, and one of the arguments for the existence of music is that it enhances social bonding. So that's awesome, and there's other ways that we can do that. And with philosophy, that's where we would like to, it's actually wiser for us as philosophers to bond socially in pro-social ways than become antisocial and be more disagreeable with each other, or pigeonhole people into certain philosophical silos. That's not, that's just about an individual creating an in-group, out-group bias and saying I'm better than them, downward social comparison, and it's just not, there's a better way to be with other people than just trying to be right. And that goes back to the nature of the value of understanding, right? Instead of being right. So anyways, read philosophy to see other viewpoints. So again, we talked about that earlier, like the value of reading philosophy and why that's so important. And there's a whole bunch of stuff. So, there's Rene Descartes, his Meditations. That's a big deal for skepticism. And it's the start of like the early modern period. And then you have John Locke and you have George Berkeley. You got Thomas Reid. He's super cool, Scottish philosopher. And then there's, obviously Kant and Hume. Those are really big thinkers. And if you read even one of their books, it's like a life achievement thing. I've read most of those, or the main sections of other ones for sure. And like Berkeley, I would never really read again. I don't really care. It's interesting to see the progression of ideas. Like, this was the next major thinker that advanced this idea to this next level. And so, yeah. Okay, anyways, whenever you have a discussion, the first starting point is getting informed. And that's, again, understanding the other person's perspective. And even Stephen Covey talks about seek to understand, then to be understood. And part of that helps, too, because then you can just kind of use the other person's language to communicate the ideas that you have, and they'll understand you more when you use terms they're familiar with, right? So you become more effective when you care about what other people think and what they say. And you can ask questions to confirm, but again, it's not good to cut people off. This is a communication principle, Okay, so then Nuke, one cool thing he's talking about being is change, and
I don't know if that's necessary. Like, we have to unpack that. Being is, and then becoming is change. And so one question we could say is, how are we a being? How do we exist if we are always becoming? Or how can we become if we are currently being? Okay, so then they just talk about a huge digression into life on other planets. And obviously you can talk about the definition of life and the origin of life. And so, yeah, let's go past all of this. Okay, and then Pete talks about his virtues of philosophy. So the first one is skepticism. So skepticism is important, just like we talked about Rene Descartes. Skepticism is not just accepting things as soon as they're told to you, demanding justification. You know, I think that's healthy skepticism. I don't think we should just assume everything is false. That's not founded. But the weight of truth or the merit of the thing is based on the evidence to support it, right? So anyways, so Pete identifies that there is a bias in information. I think he goes a bit too far when he says every source of information is biased. Okay, but it doesn't mean that it's like untrue. Like, it depends on, you know, this is a bit of an overgeneralization. I would try to be a bit aware of, like, analytic truths, for example, are true. Like, how are they biased? Like, a triangle has three sides. So I guess it depends on what we mean by information. If we're talking about like news agencies, then sure, you know, because they have values and interests, and those values and interests influence what they say and how they say it. So, okay. I guess we have to define information here. There's no way to experience objectivity or truth. Yeah, I don't know. I think that we do experience objectivity. Like, I'm seeing a table here, right? Like, there is an object in front of me, and this object's existence is not dependent on me seeing it or dependent on me existing. It's independent of me, and that's kind of a test for reality. Does it exist even if I don't exist? You know, it's more real than when I imagine something in my mind and I stop imagining it, and now it's like a memory, like, you know, like, doesn't exist in the same way. So I think we need to talk about objectivity. We can talk about Kant's phenomena and noumena, that we experience the phenomena of things, that it's my perception of this thing that I can't see for what it really is, because I always see it through myself as a human. And then truth. So again, like a priori truths or analytic truths. I would say that we can that's unbiased. Maybe how it's being used can be biased. I'm not really sure. I think it's important to talk about bias. I think that we don't want to have like a view of things just not making sense or not believing in knowledge. I don't think that's necessarily useful, and I don't think that's the purpose of why we have reasoning in itself anyways. Reasoning is the thing that's supposed to make sense of things, you know? And so, yeah. Okay. So, can never be realized. I think approaching like goals definitely makes sense. And that's what I understand objective ethics is. There's like the objective nature of a mathematical equation, and then there's the practice of writing it out and doing it. And so there's the objective nature of like utilitarianism, and then there's the practice of applying it, which takes practical wisdom. It's a thing you have to get good at. Okay. Number 2, logic. Does proposition follow from another? So over here, what makes a statement true if it's the conclusion of an argument? This really fundamentally goes down to like categorical reasoning, and it depends on how the ideas you are putting together fit together. In some ways, we can draw out truth tables, for example. We can determine if some forms of reasoning are valid or invalid, and then whether it's factual is whether it's true. So validity and truth are necessary for soundness. If a premise is false, the sun is made of cheese, whereas if the premise is true, the sun has hydrogen in it, you know, then we can continue the reasoning. It doesn't mean everything will be true after that. Like, there was light, okay, God exists. The first thing is true, but the second thing, how does that connect to the first thing? And so the study of logic is understanding sound structures, just like an architect would understand how a building does not fall. And so there's certain
axioms that we use in reasoning. So like the law of identity. A equals A. I am me. Book equals that object, right? And then there's the law of the excluded middle and the law of non-contradiction. And so when we follow these laws of thought from Aristotle and other principles of reasoning, then, and that's what again, we just study that stuff. It's like math. And then we just get good at it. You know what I mean? It's practice. So the root of logic is so that we know what the truth is. That's at least in an analytical way. If you mean the truth of like experience or like what the good life is, that's a different question. There's a different answer for that one, right? Being philosophical and how you live your life would be the answer. Okay, so openness. So wrong about everything, analytic truth. We're wrong about everything. So again, an analytic truth, we're not wrong about like a triangle has 3 sides, right? Or there is a laptop on the desk, a synthetic truth. These things are true, you know? And so scientifically, we may be able to develop better explanations when we have more robust data. But that doesn't mean that the fundamental nature of things like gravity or what we're trying to describe with the words we're talking about isn't real, right? We are experiencing reality. We are in reality. We are real. You are real and I am real. Even though we're in this like hyper real medium of the video and stuff. That's just like awesome. That's just us being human. Be like, what the fuck? So enjoy it. It's great. Like we have it, fucking enjoy it. Just don't abuse it. Like there's other things in life too. So, okay, one second. Let's check this. Only approaching the path to wisdom as a quest to ever be so slightly less wrong can we come to walk that path. So this is like a discussion of improvement and not like being arrogant in yourself. And that's awesome. That's like, it's humbling and it's important. You know, Socrates says, I know that I know nothing. And when he said that, he meant that he didn't want to be one of the people that says they know something when they actually don't. And that's why the Oracle of Delphi said Socrates is the wisest man or whatever, right? And so, you know, it is wise for us to do that, but at the same time, we do know things. Like, you know shit. Like, it doesn't make sense to say you don't know stuff, you know? Like, that is a real thing. And we can study the nature of what our knowledge is if we take a true justified belief approach. That is a functional approach that we can utilize. And part of us is the practice of reasoning is being non-monotonic. New information will come in. And when it does, you can adjust your reasoning almost as a inference to the best explanation. Like, I'm just going to work with what I got and go from there. And part of the wisdom is being open to new information so you can evaluate and keep on checking stuff, which is fundamentally just science. And it's fine. It's good. You know what I mean? Some things are true independent of our experience, though. Like the analytic truths, the triangle has 3 sides. So anyways, okay, let's go on to the next one. Rapport. Okay. Philosophy is defined as a conversation. So again, we talked about philosophy earlier, and we can go through that. Philosophy, there is this dialogue element to it. And in debating, one person says something and the other person says something else. And so that's part of it. But again, that is one part of philosophy. It is not a one-to-one ratio where philosophy is only a conversation. It's also a discussion about this progression of ideas over time. Plato says something, then Aristotle builds on it, and then the next guy builds on it, and they go from there, right? Or they directly call one another out, like in the early modern period, and say this guy was wrong, and this is why. And they provide a different conceptual analysis of experience or self-awareness, right? So it's a conversation. So philosophy is defined as the love of wisdom, but we can take this interpretation and I think we have to add some stuff too, you know. And being philosophical or a core part of it is definitely the dialogue and the conversation. But again, it's how you live your life, right? Perspective of the arguments, trajectory of the history of written philosophy. So this reading of what philosophy is, I think, is going from this orientation or this trajectory, like the history of ideas, because it builds on itself. When you read the history of philosophy, you can see how these ideas build on themselves. And then, But there is more to it. than just that. And it depends on what we mean by wisdom, right? Understand what you speak about and your motivations. So when you don't be ignorant, know what you're talking about so that you can have a valid and sound preparation of information for the person. It's not just an opinion. It's a supported, structured form of reasoning. What are your motivations for communicating this information? People sometimes come from the wrong place. They come from, again, being malicious. They're angry with you and they want to hurt you, or they have some narcissistic weirdness and they need to be right. And the sophist will distort the truth just for the sake of being right or whatever. And that's anti-philosophical. There's other problems of motivations that people could have in the conversation itself or in the way that they think. We can maybe say it's a mental illness, you know what I mean? Delusional beliefs, for example, or socializing people, like, are using indoctrination. Like, that's another problem. And then there's a value in the content. So this understanding, not being ignorant and looking at our motivations, is more or equivalent to the value of the content of the belief or the idea. So if you believe in Platonism, you like Plato, then your approach to that belief, the liking of Plato, is just as important as Plato, right? Pete talks about rules and styles of form. So maybe he's going with this understanding and motivation thing, or does he mean the form of philosophy? There's the problem of the sophists, people that are not arguing in good faith. This notion of dogmatism or poor reasoning. So some people just don't give a shit, and it's like this weird social hierarchy thing where they just want to look like they were right, but they're not. And you can see that with religious fanatics. You know, they just have a loudspeaker in the center of Toronto and just yell out shit, and you're walking by and you're like, I don't fucking agree with that. Like, what you just said is not fucking true, dude. Like, it's just not. But if you try to say something, they would just go in your face, and like it's not a philosophical engagement. That's like, again, a form of indoctrination, right? Or like, I think propaganda has a negative connotation. I think it's false information. I think we should dichotomize propaganda and news. News is true, propaganda is false. They're both being disseminated out there. That makes the most sense to me, you know? I think people conflate these ideas. It philosophically doesn't make sense. It's better just to separate them. Anyways, and then use critical thinking to evaluate whether it's one or the other. Okay, so yeah, so rules and style forms, about sophists, blah, blah, blah. So then number 5, definitions. Philosophical problems are semantics. So that's one claim of philosophy. It's just semantics. It's just how do you define terms and reasoning and stuff. A lot of time is wasted when people don't know what they're talking about, and they define things differently, for example, or they misread what the other person is saying, and they're attacking that thing, but it's not actually them. It's like a red herring or a straw man argument, right? And it's important. That's why it's so important to listen and to be empathetic with their perspective. How do they see it, you know? And then you can talk about that. Talking about your stuff, if they're willing to listen, you can, but that's not always the case. Define what you mean, right? Help the other person out. You are more reasonable when you define what your terms are, right? And then also avoids misunderstandings. So that's Pete's contribution to this discussion here. So the next one is Bias 43, and so this is where I was summoned. You asked what I think about this, my insight, so I'm just kind of going through a commentary, and then I'll do a little discussion at the end. I've kind of been talking throughout, right? So it talks about curiosity and asking questions. Curiosity is a fundamental psychological behavior approach, cognitive module that we apply to our interactions with ourselves and the world around us, which includes asking questions. Inquisitorial is a word I learned in like high school, and I just like, that was me. I was like, why is this the case? Like, what is going on here? You know? And there's an art of doing it. Like, you don't want people to feel when you're asking them stuff that's like an interrogation or you're coercing them to give you information. You know, like there's a tactful way, and if you practice and you get feedback, like people identify in this presentation here, you'll learn more about how to do it in a way that they're willing and wanting to share information with you, right? But part of it is not being skeptical and saying, well, why is this true? They believe it, you know, they could be lying to me, right? There's an intentionality thing you can talk about. But then there's also like, is it true? Is what they're saying true? And one fallacy is the appeal to authority, that it's true because I said it. Just because someone says something doesn't make it true. water. Okay. So super cool. Thanks for inviting me into this. Hope you guys enjoy the discussion here. So next is they're talking about find a place to discuss philosophy. So they take a different approach. And I would agree with this as well. They, that's why I say that going to a class is important and engaging with people in that context. And the environment needs to be healthy and conducive towards being philosophical. If it's in a dogmatic environment or the workplace and your boss is a bit of an asshole, there's certain subjects just might not be good in that context, right? So one needs to stop reading at a certain point and practice formulating arguments themselves. And so, yeah, like you do need to, at some point, put the book down. You will be a greater philosopher if you can put the book down and learn to engage with people in some ways. And I think about how do we understand philosophy or the philosopher or being the philosopher. We can phrase it in different ways. And one way is if you looked at a group of people and you picked one out, you're like, that is the philosopher, that guy right there, or that girl or whatever you want to say. And that means something, I think. I think that is you're designating that individual, or you could say that if they were things, that object is whatever A is. This person is a philosopher, And so you want to go to a place where there's other people that are like that. And when you engage with people, they will see you like that, right? When you explain yourself and you think in a certain way and that's how you talk, you are being a philosopher in that sense. One needs to stop reading at a certain point and practice formulating arguments themselves. Okay, we do that. When you discuss with others, you get feedback. Others respond to your explanation and ideas. And so when you explain things, people will say that didn't make sense, or me doing this is great feedback for me because I can see myself. And when I listen to it, I can say this is good, this is bad. I need to work on this. So this is a hyper level of awareness that I can save this information, and then I can modify my own presentation skills. I give myself feedback and stuff, right? So you do this with others, do this with yourself. This is another example. This is like a different form of philosophizing. Okay. So then if you have ideas, you talk about an idea, like I've been thinking about like free will, or, I'm like, maybe you want to get married or something like that. And then you talk to your friends and then you discuss the nature of marriage and what it means for you. How is your life going to change? Right? Or, if you get a dog, right? What does that mean? And how to, what does it mean for you? What are your responsibilities as animal? What are the legal implications of owning the animal? And so going through this is just reasoning in some ways, or we go back to the word understanding again. Discussing it with others. Being critical is fundamental to being philosophical. Otherwise, you're just kind of like thinking, but it's not critical thinking. It's just you're just letting one thought go on its own without intervening at all with the structure of thoughts and committing to certain kind of ideas. There's a certain sense of ownership of our ideas, right? And critical thinking can give you, being philosophical, reasoning through stuff, understanding things, can give you a structured sense of ownership that you can't even take it away yourself, because you're like, it just makes sense, and you're incorporating other people's feedback. You're not just like doing compartmentalization when a religious person just doesn't listen, or they say like, this is the devil speaking or something. That's craziness, It just perpetuates delusional thinking. Okay, anyways. So feedback is a way to improve, 100%. Feedback is very important, and you can do it on your own. With others is very important too. Some social groups allow this, especially I touched on this earlier, even if it's not perfect in the mode of discussion. So that they were just referencing like, you might not be good at explaining things, or your reasoning might not be poor, but at least you're making an effort. And some social groups will foster like teaching you and helping you understand stuff. And that's like, I don't understand shit all the fucking time. And part of of me understanding things is accepting that I don't understand it, asking people questions. But you do want to learn to think on your own. You just don't want to be dependent on others to think for you. You have to be able to remember reasoning. There's the procedure of doing it, and that comes with practice, like just playing an instrument. And and then socialize with people. That's why I have a philosophy group chat on WhatsApp. If anyone wants to join, just message me and I'll send you the form or whatever. And it's like a membership application. And then so it's important. That's why taking classes is good too. And some people you'll resonate more. just your personalities and then your values and your interests. And it's good to learn from those people. Like, that's part of being human. You know, being philosophical is being human. It's not alien to us. It is us, you know? And we'd like to learn about other species that philosophize as well. That'd be crazy awesome. You know, like, what would we learn from them? Okay. And so I said I was going to come in here with this. And then Altair says something here. They're talking about empathy, the value of empathy. So how does this person feel? And then how do they see things? And then they say you can practice this through literature and media. There's certain, I guess, maybe movies, or I'm not really sure exactly what they mean by media here. Could be the news, I'm not sure. And literature, certain books, so philosophy books. Fiction books, too. Like, there's some, like, Isaac Asimov, you know, science fiction novels that are good for that. And there's morals and ethics in some of the best books. So there's lots in there for sure. Curiosity, again, comes up. This asking questions and trying to understand why. The question of why is like the philosopher's question. Your value is not proving a point or being right, but it's the value of truth, or going back to the value of understanding. You know, if I concede being right in that social setting, and I also choose to not be arrogant for a broader, connected, comprehensive structure of all of these ideas, which is the understanding. And there's a maturity in a person, or like people would say intellectual honesty, about saying I was wrong, you know? And first figure it out for yourself. You know, that's part of being philosophical. And then take responsibility with the others, that if you ever were arrogant to them, you're like, hey, I recognize I was wrong about this. And people, that makes their heart feel good. Like, they're happy to hear that you're growing and learning, whoever you are. So you win by learning about life and yourself, by questioning the world, possibilities, and the self. And so questioning the world, like, what is going on in my environment? What is this place? Possibilities is like, what could happen, right? And why could it happen? You want to make sure some things are impossible. You know, like, I'm not going to magically go through the earth right now. It's like impossible, you know? Unless you give some weird quantum physics example that's like, bro, it's not what we're talking about. And the self. And so questioning myself, questioning our thoughts and ideas, the way we see things, our behaviors, our ethics, were we ethical in that moment? Not just assuming you're always right, but you don't want to be depressed and have a hyper negative view of yourself. That's not healthy either. And then don't take things for granted. This is like a Dalai Lama thing, you know, like appreciate and practice gratefulness. It's more of like how to live thing, you know? Okay, cool. So that was good. So let's go to the next one. Altair talks about the notion of the true philosopher. So I kind of talked about that, at least in the perception of others, if they were going to designate somebody. But if it's for yourself, like, what does it mean to be a true philosopher, you know? It's like, it is a journey of what is known, you know? How do I know things, and what do I know? And there's a whole structure and process. You start here, and you can build beliefs, but there's a whole thing. And that's what philosophers have been writing about. Like this, it's this center shelf. That's the history of philosophy. This one's psychology, and that's science. So, you know, and learning the history of philosophy and reading, or at least you don't have to read the books. Like, you don't have to be a professional philosopher. You can just read like a short summary of this stuff. And then if you want to know more about something specific, you can read like the actual reading that the guy did. The Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy is a great place to do this. So understanding that, the way that you engage with yourself, that's being a philosopher. Part of it doesn't matter what other people think. Like, Plato talks about the good man and what people perceive as the good man, you know, or whatever. And it's better to be the actual good man than whatever people think is the good man, the perception of that person. So the true philosopher cares more about being and the thing itself than an appeal to the perceptions of others, right? So the true philosopher, going with what Altair is saying here, they have a hard time making decisions or forming opinions about things they don't know. They don't want to be ignorant, right? They're always doubting stuff. Now, you got to be cautious here. You don't want to like not be like have a phobia and not be able to survive. Like, that's not healthy for people. So we have to be able to there we go. We have to be able to proportion our curiosity so that it's healthy, right? Our doubt.
Yeah, sorry about that. I was just trying to see what slide we're on, but it doesn't matter. Okay, and then avoid heuristics. So heuristics are mental shortcuts, and they are usually efficient and they can be correct often, but then they also systematically lead us to error. So Kahneman's thinking fast and thinking slow, the availability heuristic, for example. What is most available to mind through memory is my answer or my judgment. But it's not necessarily true that if I'm staring at the number 9 and then I pull it away, and then because it's the number I remember most frequently, that's the number you'll draw from the deck. There's actually a 1 in 52 chance. There's not a higher chance, right? So, anyways, heuristics, try to avoid them, right? When appropriate. And so sometimes maybe they're really good for you. You need to use your heuristics. I can't think about moving my arm. It's developed into some form of a habit. But yeah, like Greigenzer talks about heuristics in a good sense. Cognitive bias, I almost want to restructure these because heuristics is developed as negative connotation, but I think cognitive bias is a better way to talk about when we have errors of reasoning, and then heuristics are actually positive moments of quick processing. Like when you catch a ball, you don't have to calculate the trajectory. You can just kind of, where it's going to be. Anyways, the true philosopher takes time and puts effort into their reasoning. They think about what they're going to say, and they think about their beliefs. Yes, 100%. So Alter gives some philosophy rules. So have an open mind. And that's important. Evaluate beliefs. Don't be dogmatic and only look at your way. Try to see things from different perspectives. Be critical. Utilize critical thinking, which involves skepticism. Asking, how does this make sense? Can I recreate the reasoning in my mind as if I'm like reading like a little, I don't know. I see it as like a box. Like there's like premise, conclusion, or the conclusion is resting on the premises. And if the premises come out, the whole thing falls, It has to be like built correctly. So you can kind of visualize it, or you can structure it as it connects together in your mind when you're reading stuff. You say, oh, that's not valid. That doesn't follow from that. Okay. Use logic. So part of that is learning how to do logic. I can't do a lecture on logic right now because it would take forever. Empathy, there's inductive reasoning and there's deductive reasoning. Deductive reasoning necessarily follows from the premises because it's analytically true. It has to be true if the premises are true. Whereas inductive reasoning is only probabilistically true. Like crows exist, therefore I will see a crow when I come outside. I might see a crow, right? I can't say I will see a crow. There's a probability that I'll see it. Okay, anyways. So distinguishing between those two, that's the first part of formal reasoning, right? Empathy, skepticism, and logic without biases. So that's the goal, is develop empathy, know how to have appropriate skepticism, learn some logic. If you really want to be a philosopher, you're going to have to learn a little bit of logic, right? Understand what biases are and be aware of them. Sometimes our mental shortcuts may be useful for us. So there has to be some judgment here, right? Okay, next. So Real Human Being talks about they're looking for help on the philosophical journey. And so part of it is understanding yourself and why are you on this journey? What are your goals? What are you trying to figure out? When I first started, I wanted to be able to prove that God doesn't exist in the religious Christian orientation, because that's where I came from, as a Catholic school, and I was very frustrated that I didn't understand how to explain what I knew didn't make sense. And so that was the beginning. Also other weird beliefs like ghosts and extraterrestrials and near-death experiences, astral projection, all that paranormal stuff. So I learned all that stuff first, and then I started seeing these underlying structures of philosophy as an analytic discipline. And then I was like, well, I just need to understand all of that. And so I did a whole mapping of that. Is a lot of it, not all, you can't do all of it, but a lot. So help on that journey. Part of it is, what is your journey? Is it you living a good life? Because we can talk about that. Is it you understanding the history of philosophy or going to school for philosophy? We can talk about that. Is it enlightenment? We have to define what that is. So I think having more conversations, join my philosophy society. And you will become a better philosopher. Read the organizational mandate that I published on my website. You'll become a better philosopher. And everything that everybody said
in this chat is think about it, and you'll be a philosopher, you know? And the good stuff, if you want to be wise, then you would incorporate the good things. Like, I'm learning a lot from this too, and I appreciate everything that everybody said. This is great stuff, right? Okay, next, Altair says, you can train yourself in almost any conversation through curiosity. So curiosity is like a core value, and you could say psychological process. There's something going on with the brain. There's some kind of difference in attention or what we're saying to ourselves. It's not just the same state as everything else. Again, developing the skill of critical thinking, super cool. It's like strengthening a muscle. Yeah, the more you practice it, the better you get at it. And getting feedback, that way others help you with your errors and your mistakes. Empathy helps. Try devil's advocate. So it's trying to take the oppositional perspective. But again, don't piss people off or aggravate them. That's not going to help you. The goal isn't to be devil's advocate, but it's being curious, asking questions. Or you could say being Socratic. That's fundamentally what people are saying when they say curious. In philosophy, we just talk about being Socratic. And really that just comes down to asking questions relative to the information that's given. Not part of being Socratic is not, I guess it's a little bit more than being curious. Because being curious is just asking questions or wanting to know more or something like that. Whereas being Socratic is also not imposing assumptions, right? Working within the context that is given and asking questions from within that context or evidence. So, how we engage with our decisions and opinions, think about how you could be wrong. If I'm going to choose to do this, how could that have negative consequences? If I believe this, what are the consequences of that? Okay, next. Oh, that's it. Okay. Cool. So, yeah. So basically, we, it's important for us to, like, the main question here again was, let's just go back. I think it was, how do you get better at doing philosophy, right? Getting better at philosophy. So, the way this is phrased, it's almost like philosophy as a subject. So if it just getting better at philosophy, part of it is reading. If it was getting better at being philosophical, getting better at being a philosopher, I think it's a little bit different. Being philosophical, I think, is more of a social. It's definitely a critical thinking thing. Philosophy is like almost like the subject of philosophy, and how do you get better at knowing the subject? Being philosophical is how you're engaging with ideas. So one could know stuff really well, but have poor engagement habits. Like they could have like factual knowledge, and they would be better at philosophy because they have factual knowledge. Whereas being philosophical is like a verb. It's a little bit different. And then how to be a good philosopher. That's different too, because part of it I think has to have meaning to you, not just to what all these other people said, And yeah, so what is philosophy? Philosophy is wisdom. How do we, what does it mean to be wise? And loving sound judgment. It means I value sound judgment, or love sound reasoning, right? And so you make an effort towards getting, like it's getting better, but improving at those things like reasoning, your judgment. I would say the absence of mental illness, like learning well-being, living a good life. And like any other skill, joining communities where you see people that are performing a degree of mastery at that. And so I guess this chat group or forum with Pete is a place where you can find others that are good at it. But again, there's books, and then there's school. You can go to school and learn it there too. So I think we have to talk a bit more about, I guess you talk about critical thinking. So yeah, if you just mean critical thinking, then reading critical thinking books will definitely help. And you can be your own teacher, but it is useful having someone who's read a lot of stuff and has been doing it for a while to kind of bounce ideas off of. And sometimes you don't know when you're making mistakes, and other people can see shit and they can tell you, and then you can improve again, right? So yeah, okay, that was like an hour, and we'll do another forum talks sometime soon.